So Windows comes with some default security settings and security possibilities. So if you go to the Start menu and go to Settings, make sure that you go to Update and Security and always install the latest updates. Because what can happen is that there are some security holes that have been fixed and that you didn't install those updates yet, so your computer is then vulnerable. Now, other things you can do to secure your computer is to set real-time protection on and some other protection, cloud-based protection. It will help you to stop malware from running on your PC. As well as firewall. So if you type firewall here, you'll see this firewall which can be turned off or can be turned on, sorry. And it should be on to prevent people from taking over your computer. And so what we'll do now is to give you a demonstration of what can happen if none of that is running. So what we'll do is go to Update and Security. We'll turn Windows Defender off, and we'll also turn off the firewall. And then I'll show you how this computer can be compromised, how it can be hacked. And one thing to note is that you don't actually have to follow the steps here that the hacker is doing. It's just a demonstration that it's possible. So I'm going to type firewall, Windows Firewall, and turn that off. So there is no security settings whatsoever running. Then I'll start the hacker's computer. So this is the Windows computer. I'll put it on the right, and then I'll put the hacking computer or the attack box on the left. So the attack box or the Windows computer on the right, and we have the hacker's computer on the left. You'll see Kali here. We're using a system called Kali Linux, which is a system hackers often use because this computer system contains many hacking tools. So we'll start the hacking computer. Now that can take a moment or so to start. Kali is available for free on kali.org. So we'll start the hacking computer. Now this is just a demonstration. You don't actually have to follow along with the steps shown in this video, apart from turning on your firewall, and in the settings turn on your firewall and make sure Windows Defender is running to malware from taking over your computer. So in this case I turned everything off for the demonstration of what can happen when you turn everything off. And so it will take a moment, but it's starting the hacking computer on the left. And what the hacker will do is create a malicious program, malware, that the Windows computer then runs. And once the program is run, we have taken over the computer. And so here it takes a moment. It's starting the hacker's computer on the left. And you'll see just a simple desktop information. It contains many hacking tools, but we'll just need one for creating the software. So you'll see there's a start menu with many different hacking tools. We'll start a terminal to create the malicious program. Now I'm going to enlarge the font here. So I enlarge the font. And now what we can do is use a program called MSF Venom. And this is a program that can create malicious program or malware. So MSF Venom. And you'll see this is the command example usage. So MSF Venom. And then with this command, we can create the malicious Windows program. The MSF Venom lets hackers create malicious program, not just for Windows, but also for Apple computers, Android devices, for Linux computers, and so on. So it can create a malicious program. I'm going to copy the command, paste it. So you might think that this is all, but we actually need to set this internet address here. You'll see IP. You'll see it creates a -P specifies the platform, so it's a Windows. We're targeting a Windows computer. You'll see -F here. This is the extension. Windows programs have a .exe extension. So on any Windows computer, for example, we can go to the program files directory, select any program. You'll see application here, right click properties, and you'll see .exe. Now why is that important? Well, different systems have different extensions. So Windows uses exe, but for example Apple computers uses DMG. It doesn't use exe. And Android devices use APK. It doesn't use. So you can specify the extension and then the file name. In this case I named it payload.exe. So the one thing we'll need to change is the IP address. And which IP address or which internet address do we need? We need the internet address or the network address of this computer. So we can find that address by opening a new tab and typing the command IP space A space S and press enter. So that's IP space A space S. And you'll see addresses here. You'll need the bottom one that starts with, in this case, 192, which is the network address. So we're going to copy that. And then paste it in. So this command, and then when we press enter, what it will do is it creates the malicious executable. So we're going to press enter, and it will create the malware program, which has to be started by the Windows user. So that needs to be, for example, on a USB flash drive, or maybe on a shared drive, or it can be just sending a link, or maybe an email with the download link. Either way, the Windows user needs to run the malware for this to work, for this hack to work. So it takes a moment to, it's now creating the malware program in the background, and this takes a moment depending on the speed of your computer. So once it's completed, you'll have a file called, you named it. So remember, I named it -o payload.exe. That is the file name, and you'll also see the file size. So this file is now saved or created, payload.exe. If I go to the home directory, you'll see payload.exe that we need to get onto the victim's computer, so on the Windows computer, and the user needs to run that. So might give it some different name like setup.exe, or maybe something that the user is interested in. So we need to get this file onto the Windows computer. Now there are different social engineering tricks you can use, like sending an email, sending a link, or maybe sharing some file. And that way we can get the user to execute this malicious program. Okay, so the user actually downloaded this program. What we need to do is start a listener, because we'll take over the computer. So we'll open a terminal again, and we'll type msf console and press enter. That will start the Metasploit console, which is a tool that we'll then use to take over the computer. We'll need to configure it with a few commands. So it will take a moment or so to start, and as the name implies, it has console, so it's a terminal interface, msf console. This takes a moment to actually load. And so once it's loaded, we need to type some commands. Okay, so we type the command use space exploit multi-handler. You'll see we need to set the payload. Now you might wonder, what is the payload? So that's like the target system or the system we're targeting. So if you remember, we typed MSF Venom with the payload here. So we're targeting a Windows system, and we need to copy this line. So we'll type set payload and then paste it in. Press enter. So we set the payload, and we might need to set some other options. So we type show options, and we need to set the lhost value, which is the address. So we type set lhost to the IP address here. And then we type run and press enter. So now it's waiting for a connection. Now if I start the program, you'll see we received a connection, and we have the meterpreter shell. Well, we don't actually see anything on the Windows computer. Seems like nothing happens. But actually now we can remotely control the computer. So for example, we can type screenshot, and it saved a screenshot of the victim's computer. So I can go to the directory here, and it saved a screenshot of what's actually on the computer's screen. Now you can do all kind of things. So if you type help, you see all kind of things you can do. For example, you can dump the passwords and play sounds on the victim's computer. You can do things with the webcam and microphone, like record or start video chat. You can control the mouse or watch what the user is doing. If you type screenshot, you can see everything that the user is doing in real time. You can shut down the computer or go into a system shell, so browse around the file system. You can kill programs or stop programs. And there's all kind of things that you can do. For example, create new directories or files, upload and download files, and so on. So let's say we use some of these files. So let's type dir to see which directory we are in. So you'll see different files here, and we are inside the downloads directory. Now we might download or upload a file. So let's change the directory. Let's go one directory higher and go into the desktop directory. Now we are in the desktop directory. And let's upload some file. So let's create some file here. Empty file, call it hacked.txt. Okay, so now what we might do is to upload that file. And you'll see now we uploaded that onto his desktop. So you can remotely control the computer now using this command line interface, using the interpreter shell. So that is why you want to turn on your Windows firewall and your Windows Defender. Otherwise, one click on a malicious program and the hacker can take over your computer. Before we go into details, we'll look at Windows core processes or core Windows processes. And so learn something about the fundamentals of Windows operating system. Otherwise, it will be like a needle in a haystack to work out things. And so we'll start with one of the Windows core processes called the built-in tool called Task Manager. And this may help you to understand which programs are running in the Windows machine. So it's a graphical Windows program and shows you the running processes or the running programs, running apps on the Windows system. So if I click Start on the left corner and type Task, you'll see we can start the Task Manager. And by default, it has a simple view with just the programs running. Now you can start more programs if you want to. Let's say we open some program here, and you'll see that program then appears in the list. So Task Manager shows you a list of programs. Now by default, it doesn't show you any information besides this list of programs. You can get information like the resource usage. So how much memory does the program consume? How much computing power does it consume? And so on. So if you click on more details, it will show you that. So it shows you how much computing power it consumes and also how much memory it consumes, along with some other information. So you'll see the Maps app here is using a lot of computing power. And if we close it, you'll see the program disappears from the list and also the computing power down here. And so Task Manager is quite a useful program in that you can see which programs are running and also programs are running in the background. So you'll see some of these programs are in the foreground that you actually can see on the desktop. But there's also a lot of programs here that run in the background. So that run, but you don't actually see them on the screen. For example, Cortana is running here to the Windows AI, and by default is running here in the background, but you don't see it, right? And some other programs here are running on the background as well, like Outlook, something for the printer, and some other apps. And so there's two kind of programs here, like foreground and background. Background you don't see on the desktop. Now, you can click on details to get even more information. So if you click on details, you see different information, like you see a description of the application, the user it's running, the status, so some are suspended here, some are running, and also the process ID. So some basic information. So you see all kind of programs that are running here. Now some of these programs are Windows default applications. For example, System, this is a Windows default application, CRSS. So this is a default application of Windows. WinInit. We have LSASS and WinLogin.exe, as well as Explorer.exe. So those are Windows default applications. So let me just write those down. So that's System, so those are Windows default applications that should always be running. Now, why does that matter? Because once you know the default applications, the Windows applications that are always running, you can find out suspicious applications. So by differentiating between, okay, which applications are running and which are Windows applications. For example, we have browserbroker.exe. It's not in the default application list. So that might be a suspicious program. So you can, in this way, you can, if you make a list of your default applications, you can find which applications are not default and might be malicious on your computer. Now you can also use the Task Manager to stop any program. For example, we have some programs here. We'll go to the Processes tab. And let's say we want to close this program. We can do a right click and click End Task. So you'll see that closes the program. Now you can do that for any program. Right click and task, and it stops that program. Now there's some other things you can do here. We can go to details, and then it switches to the details tab with that information. So you can right click properties, and it shows you the properties windows of the app. Overall, usually you'll use this when a program is crashed and you want to close it, or if you want to check if there's any strange application running. So you could go to the details, check in this list, compare with your default list to see if there's any malicious program running. So right click and task, and you'll see that closes the program. In the performance tab, you also see that the CPU usage or the computing usage gone down because we closed those programs. You can see the same thing in memory where we close the programs and then the memory usage goes down. Next we'll look at sysinternals. So what is sysinternals? With the knowledge of the Windows core processes, we can now discuss the available toolset that will help you analyze the Windows PC. So sysinternals is a compilation of over 70 Windows-based tools, which fall in different categories like file and disk utilities, network utilities, process, security, system, and miscellaneous. And so one program we'll look at is TCP View. It's a network utility tool, and it will show you network connections on your Windows computer. So if you go to the internet here and you search for this or TCP View for Windows, you'll see it's part of sysinternals live, and you can click Run Now and download this program to your. Once you download it, you can go to the View Downloads folder, or just click on your File Explorer and click Downloads, and you should have TCP View there. So what does this TCP View do? Well, TCP View is a Windows program that will show you connections of your outgoing to the internet based on system programs or whichever programs are running. So if I double click on it, click yes, you'll see system view, or you'll see TCP view with the outgoing connection. So on the left here we have the program names. You'll see all the programs that are running on the computer. Then you have some tabs like the process ID, which if you recall is the same as you would see in Task Manager. So if we type task, and you'll see those, click in details, you'll see those programs have a process ID, so that matches the process ID. But instead of just showing programs, it also shows network connections. So you'll see a tab here called remote address. That is the internet address that the program connects to. So you'll see these programs connect to different internet addresses. Every address here has a dot in between and has 4 digits. So that's called an internet address or internet protocol address, or sometimes, or very often, it's shortened into IP address, which is internet protocol address or simply internet address. That's the address, the internet address the program connects to. So in this way, you can see all the addresses that it connects to. You can also see how many packets it sends, so how many messages it sent to the remote address. So in this case, for example, we have the SVC host, which sent 58 or 60 packages now to the address. And you'll see that only send packages, how much they communicate with that remote address. Now you can sort as well. If we click on send here twice, you'll see addresses it communicates with, and how much it communicates with those addresses. So you'll see some of these don't have any connection or just waiting. They're not sending anything, while others just are sending a lot of packages to that remote address. Now these internet addresses don't necessarily mean something to us, so we know that they are connected to this or that internet address. So what you can do is any of those addresses. You can type any of those addresses in a website called ip2location.com and then click lookup. So ip2location.com, type the address, and you can see where the computer it connects to is actually located. So this computer is located in the Netherlands, and you'll see that it's a computer by corporation. So that way you can also discover maybe suspicious connection but it would be a bit tedious to check every internet address one by one. But perhaps you see some program in there that you are not sure about, and then you can check with ip2location.com where that internet address actually is. So it might indicate a malicious program sometimes when it's listed there in a strange location. Now, one thing you'll note is that it has several tabs here on top. So there's TCP4 and TCP6. That's because right now there are two versions of the Internet Protocol, and it just uses different addresses. So it might be that in TCP6 you have something listed there with the addresses if your internet provider is using IP version 6 instead of IP version 4. So there's two versions, and that's why you have those two tabs here. Now there's some other tab here called UDP. So we have a TCP tab and UDP. So the difference between this is how these packages are communicated. So TCP is a much more secure way to communicate, but at the same time it's slower because of that security. While UDP basically means throwing your packets to the remote connection, or the remote connection to you, and not verifying that those packages are actually received. So with TCP, there is some communication between the two computers, and they check is the package received, and UDP just sends the package without checking that at all. So UDP is typically used for webcam communication or audio communication, whereas TCP is often used for the web, where changes in the communication actually would be really bad, because the text wouldn't be right or the image wouldn't be right, and so on. So UDP just throws the packages without checking. So that's those two packages. So you can check UDP as well. You see there are some UDP connection or UDP packages were sent, but in this case most connections are TCP. So continuous and checking that the packages are received between client and server or between the two computers. Another sysinternals program is called Process Explorer. So you can go to the internet and look for Process Explorer, part of sysinternals, and then download it and run it. This is not the right program. You can look for Process Explorer, click Run Now, download it, and then run it. And you'll see this is a program called Process Explorer. So you have two sub-windows. The top window shows the list of the currently active processes. So you'll see all of the processes here, and including the active processes, names, and so on. And the other information is showing is like CPU usage, the processor usage, how many processes in total, and so on. You also see some tabs here, the processor usage, the name or the description, and the company that made the program. You can find some basic information. Now, just like Task Manager, you can click on any program, right click, and then stop it by clicking Kill Process. You can also give a program more priority. That means giving more processor or computing time to the program, and that way the program might run some faster. Or if a program is already slowing down your computer, you might reduce its priority to reduce its memory usage or reduce its computing usage. So that's a nice trick that you can do using the Process Explorer. You can double click on any of these apps to get some more information. For example, we have Edge here. I'm going to double click, and you get more information about the program, so where the program is located on the computer. You can see performance, so how much it's actually using the computer. So the cost of you running the program. You see some more information, how much is using the graphical processor. You also notice TCP IP here. So this is the internet connections it's using. So in this case, there are no internet connections. However, we could, for example, open some website. Open any website. And you'll see it's showing us connections, the program. So you can see any program's active connections. If you double click on it in the Process Explorer. So you will see the connections here. So this is the internet address. And you'll see now the disappeared because I closed the program. But for any program, you can see its network connections in TCP IP. Now there's some other tabs here called security, environment, job, and so on. So you can get more detailed information about whichever process you're interested in. So in this case, we started Edge, and when we double clicked on it, we could see the connections it has. So by default, here we start Edge, and you'll see it has some network connections to different computers. So this is a computer address, and this is a computer address on the internet. So you can see which connections it has. So it's a nice trick. If you want to, you can click on this System Information tab or button, and it will show you the usage of your computer by the programs. So you'll see the processor use, memory use, how much disk usage it's using. You can also switch to a specific tab, depending on if you're interested in that. Now let's say you have many programs open, and you want to know which program is actually information about the program you're looking at. So what you can do then is click on this button, find the Windows process, so you can put your mouse button down and drag it onto the program you're interested in, for example, the calculator. Now we can double click on the calculator and we can find information. For example, the calculator doesn't have any network connections. We can find the location of the calculator, performance information. It's not using a lot of processing power. So that's a nice trick. So using this drag button, you can drag it into any window, and it immediately selects the program that you are interested in. Instead of going through this list manually, you can just use this button and drag it on whatever program you're interested in. In the previous videos, we took a look at the sysinternals programs, or the basic programs, essential tools that you can use to analyze your machine. But one thing you'll notice that it only shows you real-time things that happen right now on the computer. It doesn't show you what happened in the past. So if you're interested in what happens in the past, you'll want to know about events or log events. Logs endpoint logs will record whatever happened in the computer, and then you can look into the past at what happened in the past. So that's also very interesting. So Windows by default has logs called the Windows event logs. Now those are not text files that can be viewed with Notepad or some simple text editor, but you can read the log files and see what happened to the computer in the past. Now these files, they're stored in some proprietary binary format. That's why you cannot read them with Notepad or some simple text editor. The format is .evt or .evtx. And these files typically are in Windows System32 Win Event Logs. So we can open that directory. We can go to T, Windows System32. Then there is a directory called WinEVT. So all the way on the bottom, WinEVT logs, and you'll see all kind of event log files here. So this is the directory, Windows System32 WinEVT logs. I can make this a bit larger, and you'll see I cannot open these files with just a text editor. I can right click on it and click open, but if I would open this with a text editor, it wouldn't make any sense. So there are three ways to view Windows log files. One is using the event viewer, which is a desktop application. Then there is a command line application called wevtutil.exe, and on PowerShell, the get-win event command to use the event log. Now you can select any log you want, for example, Windows or System. Let's click System. You can double click, and by default it opens it with the Windows event viewer, so the desktop application. But keep in mind, this is just one way to view, so maybe you'll prefer viewing it in the command line. This is the desktop application. So by default it looks like this. So let's enlarge this window, and you can see all the events that happened over time. So you can scroll down and see that this computer, when it started, and you can scroll down into the past and see everything that happened in the past as regarding to the system log. Now one thing you'll notice is that there's many different logs. So you'll see system log here, there's the Windows PowerShell log, there's something about the file system, different audio applications, and so on. So many different logs can be viewed or explored here just by double clicking, and then you can see what is going on actually on your system, or what went on as well in the past, because you can see the latest, but you can also go back in time. And so you can see different events happened on your Windows computer. It's possible to export the events to another format. So by default, you have this EVTX file. But if you go on the right here, you'll see save all events as. So if you click on that, you can save it in, for example, text format, or a format where it's separated by commas, so text but every value separated by commas, or XML format. So you can export the events to another format. So for example, let's save it to a text file on the desktop. Call it log. And then we can open it just using Notepad. It's possible to export it to a different format by clicking the Save All Events As. And that way you can then read it with a text editor or any other editor. It's also possible to filter the log, so you'll see lots of events here. In this case, all of them are information, but it might be that some of the event levels, they can be different levels. So if you click filter event log, you can filter the event. For example, maybe you're only interested in errors or in warnings or maybe critical. And you can then select them and click OK. And then it would filter those logs. So it would filter, for example, all the information messages out there that you just see the errors. So it's a nice way to reduce the information that you see here, because you might be interested in just the errors and not in information, for example. Another tool you can use is OS Query. So this is not a tool made by Microsoft, but instead it's a Facebook tool. This tool you can use to query any endpoint. So you can send commands to any endpoint, which can be a Windows computer, a Linux computer, Mac computer, and so on. And then you can send query, and the program will then return the information. So it's a command line program. If you scroll down, this is actually what it looks like. So you have a command line interface where you can send a query, which in this case is this line that starts with select and ends with a semicolon, and then returns the information. So one thing you'll notice that it's harder to use this than the actual Windows programs, because in the Windows programs, you can just click on whichever information you want. In this case, with the command line program, you actually have to write those commands. So it's harder to use OS Query. But at the same time, this OS Query program works on different platforms. So you can also use this on Mac, Linux, and other systems. So the queries are written in a language called SQL, and this is what it looks like. So you'll see in all cases, all of the queries start with select. It's getting data from the database. OS Query puts all the system information into a database, which can then be queried. And you'll see for different information, it can be queried. In this case, there's this query. There's many different queries that you can then use to find the information, and will then be returned in the command line. Now, because everything is in the database, all of the data is stored in tables. You'll see here, it uses the select query, so it gets data from the database. In this case, from the table processes. So you'll see from, and then it's followed by the table. That is the way the SQL language queries data. And so, which tables do we have? So OS Query comes with many different tables, or whichever data is in your system. For example, we have the process table before. You'll see there's a table browser plugins, a plugin or a table drivers, a table file, and so on. Now, there are some minor changes between different systems. So Mac will have different tables than Windows, for example. In Windows, you might be running Windows Defender, so you have a Windows Defender table, whereas on Mac, you don't have that. And so there are some minor differences, but overall, this is the way it works. So you can download OS Query from osquery.io, and if you scroll down, you'll see download OS Query, and then you are able to run it in PowerShell. So if you go to the bottom of the screen, type PowerShell, and then run PowerShell, you would then be able to type OS Query, so OS Query Y, and that would start the interactive interface, where you can then type commands such as this one, select data from whichever table you want. So in order to use the OS Query, you should be familiar with the SQL. SQL is a language that is used to interact with databases. If you don't know SQL, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to use OS Query, or you could learn SQL language and then use OS Query. So this is just an alternative way to get the same information that you could get using those graphical applications that I showed you before. And also it's important to note that this is not by Microsoft. And so it might be that you are or are not allowed to install this on your Windows computer, depending on the situation. So for example, you have the OS query running here. You could write this command to list the processes and limit it by only showing one. And then, for example, in this Linux or Mac computer, it shows you one process, the process ID, the name of the process, and the path. So that is information. In Windows, you can also get that using Process Manager or Task Manager. So we can type Task Manager, and you can find the same kind of information when we clicked on details. So the name, the process ID, and so the path we can find here. If we double click on a program, we would right click properties. We would be able to find the path of the program as well as the name. And so just another way to retrieve information. Really into command line interfaces and like to learn or interact with SQL language, then you could use that. But in general, I recommend using the default Windows applications to evaluate the system because they are always available or Microsoft easily provides them, whereas this is like a third party that you can use, but then you also have to write the SQL query, so it's more work to get the same kind of information unless you actually make programs that extract the information from OS query, but otherwise it will just take you more time to get the same information from your system.